Let's talk tonight some more about revolutions, local and faraway reality, wet and dry brains, customs, rituals, and as always, lurking behind it all, even if I do not take the occasion to point it out, we're always talking about what? Energy and its transmission. Well, back to the kind of picturizations I used for a while having to do with revolutions. In the visible world, take note of this. Revolutions, of course, all of this, I hate to keep being conditional. Someday I'm going to quit being conditional. Or if not that, someday soon I'll talk about being conditional. Nobody follow that? Well, if you couldn't quit drinking, it's like get on the street corner and condemn drinking. Or if you're shy and you can't quit drinking, condemn yourself internally. Worry about it. Find yourself guilty. Nobody follow that? All right. The conditions. The non-existent kind of, we won't call it a premise because it'll go away shortly. Saying a good premise doesn't go away. It just turns into a what? It turns into that which you hoped was going to show up, and if it does show up, then you hoped that it was going to be a lot more satisfying than it was. But remember, it was just a premise. It was just like it went through the car wash and it came out, and it went in, say, a Cadillac, and it came out a Cushman Eagle or a motor scooter, see? Or maybe it even came out a 22-inch remote control TV set, and you were expecting something else. All right, back to the serious. What appears to be in the visible worlds is a situation wherein revolutions occur when all the pleas, all the threats, and all the attempts at change have failed. But what is that? Speaking of specifically that which I said we're always speaking of anyway, on the nonverbal level of energy, of the expansion and growth of life. What you're talking about with the ordinary is resignation that the revolutions, even as they appear to happen externally in the political world, but then, of course, we're talking about, those of you who can hear it, more specifically in the internal state of your own nervous system, with that capital city known as Brainville. That the revolution, by its very definition, would seem to be the dawning of a new day, a new regime, a breath of fresh air. But what is it as it occurs in the visible world? Now, certainly, I'm aware of the fact that there seems to be a street dance and a certain period of euphoria, oftentimes when some apparent tyrannical regime has been overthrown, apparently out there, and a group of hoped for good guys show up, and everyone's happy until non-verbally the recognition again sets in the transmission of energy and life through man, that all politics, all religion, it's all a matter of dance. It's all a matter of the dominant and the submissive, which is necessary to keep life moving. That is, there is no such thing as a good revolution. There's no bad revolution. There are no good governments. There are no bad governments. There are no heroes. There are only those apparently leading some particular dance, those in power, and those that want to be in power. They can't help it. So it's supposed to be. And so you would think at first blush that what I said, that the revolutions occur when all pleas, all threats, and the attempts, the possible attempts at change have failed. Then it appears that you have reached that moment wherein the only thing left to do is to undertake a revolution. And then you would assume, at least some of the time, just by accident, that the revolution would fulfill some of the promise that the pleas and the threats and the failed attempts at change in the past had not. But think about it a second. Now forget history, because I already explained that to you. You got to have a more universal view, and revolutions really amount to nothing. Revolutions are just instant votes. It's just all changes of government's the same, whether it's done by ballot and all out there. It's just the dance going on as it should. But when it happens internally, when it happens to you, when it happens to other people, when apparently something that the person would think, would claim was drastic, was a kind of revolutionary change in their thinking, if not behavior. It happens only, if I put this to an ordinary brain, it would say yes. It happened only after the pleas, the threats. That is, someone undertakes some revolutionary action. Someone who has been smoking 5 packs a day for 30 years. And throughout that time, or some part of the time, of late, as they're spitting up more and more blood or coughing more, or there's more frightening stories on television, they more and more tell themselves, well, I should stop, I will stop. Then they threaten themselves, boy, you better stop. Did you see that thing on TV that they pulled out that guy's lung at the autopsy? And it looked like Swiss cheese that somebody had thrown into red dye number 2. You know, boy, you better watch it. And none of that seems to work. And they try. There's got to be failed attempts. They go to some kind of clinic, so they send off for some kind of $199 subliminal tape. Then apparently a revolution takes place if something happens. That is, if apparently they do change. But what is it? Was it really a revolution? Was it actually change? Now, you got to be fast with this. You have got to be slick to see this. It's not. It's resignation. It's not change. Because if apparently some revolutionary, that is, some drastic change in their behavior occurred, it's going to be on this basis. Let's take my example. That this guy goes to the doctor, and for years, let us say, he's been pleading with himself, he thinks, to quit smoking. He's been threatening himself to quit smoking. He has made attempts that failed. So you got those 3, that covers it all. Pleading, promising, then threatening, and then actually, as far as they're concerned, trying, making attempts, but they've failed. It's then, in the visible world, if it happens at all, but it's then that revolutions take place. Internally and externally, but internally is what we're on now. Let us say that we see this guy that I made up, this example. We see him, and we're around him a few minutes and realize that he is not smoking 2 cigarettes as he always did, and one off the other. And you say, did you quit smoking? If he hadn't made it clear enough to you for you to mention. He says, yes. All right, that would seem to be revolutionary. But then you're going to find out that it's a form of resignation. Because the most likely scenario in this case would be that after the pleas had failed, after the threats had failed with himself, and after these repeated attempts failed, he happened to wander in the doctor's office for some reason, and the doctor looked at him and said, you've got about 1/8 of a lung left, and I'd figured the rate you're going, you'll be dead, 70, 80 hours. And he quit smoking. But do you understand that was not a revolution? It was resignation. Do I have to be more blunt? To the ordinary earthbound intelligence, they wouldn't call it that. They would be taking what would seem to be a positive attitude. The man would be saying, I feel so much better. Now, I hope I don't die in the next few hours because I feel so good. And he would say, boy, I couldn't believe I'd do it. What he has done, try to keep in mind behind the words that there's energy involved with this. It is the same kind of circulation and transmission of energy in life's body through man that is your blood and your breath and your own being. But the way it appears is the person not has undergone some revolutionary change. They have resigned themselves to the inevitable. Variation of that, descant. They resign themselves to the obvious. If I'm going to live 70 to 80 hours, I can quit. I can quit that long. I've gone that long without cigarettes before. So if I'm only going to live another couple of days, what the hell? I'll go out on a high note. I'll go out having done something. There's a lot larger area where in this kind of revolution manifests itself other than what would seem to actually be a change in behavior. That is, that in this case, the guy quit smoking. More common, much more common, is that after the pleas, after the threats, after attempted alterations of their behavior of some specific nature has failed, and then a revolution is possible. The revolution is another stage of stagnation, but rather than the example I gave that apparently at first blush even somebody succeeded, whereas I'm telling you in that sense they actually failed. It's irrelevant. But this kind of resignation really comes out more likely in anger. It comes out in blame laying. You know, it comes out in whys. Why it's not my fault. Why I'm not up to actually being able to make some sort of change. It comes out in drugs, alcohol. But it is in a sense a resignation that the person has attempted to do something, and it does not have to be as material as smoking. It can apparently be a kind of personality problem. That I'm too shy, or that I'm too angry, I am too greedy. All the good old things, look them up in the Ten Commandments. And throughout somebody's life, they threaten, cajole, promise, and make attempts to change something that they find themselves to be guilty of. They're wired up, they feel that way. There is a kind of revolution that often takes place, but it does not go off as Bastille Day. It is not the tearing down of some unholy prison. It is not the shooting of the guards. It is not fireworks. It is not the crowd running in the street, that is in your own nervous system. It is more a whimper. It is a sigh of resignation, but the revolution is this. Is after that point you no longer whine, plead, threaten yourself, and you no longer make any attempts in that area. That's the revolution. The revolution is not run out in the streets and attack that which seems to be your nemesis or your foe. It's like you run out in the street and holler, I give up. That's the revolution. Think about it a second. You got a second? You don't find that neat? This is not the point, of course, but if you knew how to apply that in what seems to be backward history, then all the things that historians sit around and think that they're plotting, that at least intellectually makes them look superior to economists, which is a real trick. Hell, sometimes I think even some of us might be as intelligent as a weather forecaster. The revolution, of course they were not necessarily using that words, but you understand in people's lives, you've done it. There's little nicks. They're not guns cutting notches cutting somebody's on their pistol, but they're almost notches cut in your own nervous system where you have had these little revolutions. And the revolution was, it's as though Pilate, the Greek Senate, after pondering your fate for years on some matter, some aspect of your personality, it's like, in a sense, they found you not guilty, which would be revolutionary, because you were guilty. See, because you're not only the one on trial in your own nervous system. Again, I remind you, this is a part of the structure of the transmission of energy. It just seems to be all this psychological, personal stuff that so many people take personally. Thank God. You're not only the one on trial, you're not only Socrates and Jesus, you understand you are the Greek Senate and you are Pontius Pilate. But it's not really, the revolution would be, as I started to say, the revolution is that they let you go. That they did not kill you, they did not crucify you, or they did not make you commit. Harry Carey Jr. That's a form of 1940s Hollywood suicide, but I don't want to go into The revolution in this sense is that they did not do you in. But in this sense also, the revolution is not as earth-shaking as you might at first think verbally, because it's not that they said, all right, not guilty. It's like somebody sort of made it known that you could leave now, and that the Senate or Pilate or one of his minions, is like somebody mumbled something. It wasn't really not guilty, but it was like, well, go on and leave, or you can go now. Don't come back around here. That was the revolution. But it's a form of resignation. The notch cut in the nervous system is, look at the things that you would have normally taken credit for if asked, that you have changed in your life that was almost revolutionary. I'm sure a lot of you here, and a lot of you on tape, at some other time and some other place are not getting this, so watch this. How about the revolutions? Some of you, I don't know whether anybody's old enough, that's not the point. So you've heard about other people. It's like a guy who is a out-of-control Lothario, a Casanova, in the sense that he found himself guilty. He gets to be, nowadays, who knows what, 50, let's say. If any of you are 50 and it scares you, I'll say 70 so that you won't get upset. But it's like he never had a family. He could never have a relationship. The longest relationship he ever had with a woman was like 4 hours. And he condemned himself. Some of his friends, married friends, would say, boy, I admire your life. Maybe after a few drinks he'd say, I don't know what it is. I read it in the book sometime. I guess I am a pathological satyr. I'm a male nymphomaniac. But then there seems to be a revolution. He has to be 65 or 68. And he seems to sort of get a handle on it. Which I guess you people have already followed. It's like the hormones begin to slow down. And suddenly it's as though, well, now I have some more self-control. It's like a rapist becoming impotent. What great progress I'm making. There's someone who overeats getting lockjaw. Boy, am I proud of myself. All right, that is the kinds of revolutions, although people do not call it that, but that is what seems to be, looking back over one's life, if one is so hard up for a hobby, or if it's pointed out, that it feels like, well, I have done a few things. I'm not as angry as I used to be. I exercise more than I used to. I used to be lazy. All the little things. If you can see it in a certain way, though, it's not to be pessimistic. It's to get you to see how life operates. That rather than being a revolution, that is some positive change. Although you may feel good for some length of time, that you may feel good that I am starting to exercise. If you look back in a certain way, you'll find out it was a form of resignation, though. That there seemed to be things, or some specific thing perhaps, that you were finding yourself continually guilty of. You threatened yourself, you pleaded with yourself. All of that, thinking of action. One of the two obvious possible dynamics of a thinking three-dimensional human being. And those two, had no apparent effect. Then you apparently, visibly, tried to act. You did try to effect change, and you failed. But then the outcome in some way seemed to be positive. If it's going to be anything at all, you may just forget the whole affair. It just sort of dwindles, it goes away. You think about it very seldom anymore. The hormones took care of it. Your own brain chemistry took care of it. But if you do think about it, if it is brought up and you want to discuss it, you will look at it as being some sort of positive change. Yes, now I think about it, well, then you begin to try and take some sort of credit, as you're supposed to. But it was not a revolution. It was a form of resignation to the inevitable. But it cannot be called that. It would be a crimp in certain necessary flows of energy through man, specifically through man's thinking mechanisms. Now, if there is some kind of alternative to this, I hate to say there is, because then we have set up a premise. for those of you just beginning to see these tapes, remember the only decent premise is no premise. Or the premise to this is, it ain't got no premise. And I'm not pouring out, as long as we're here. Nothing has a premise. Nothing. It's people furnish their own premises. Don't pardon the pun. People carry their own premise. Nothing. The kind of obvious examples I've made to say that if you go out to a place and you pay your money to take a seminar on how to reprogram your subconscious, if that's just the title of it and you pay your money, you understand the premise. The premise is that if you can do this, whatever the hell it is, you will be more efficient. You'll be happier. You'll be a better person. Your nose will shrink. Everything's a premise. Join the church, you'll live after you die. Take my course, and you'll be a better person. Come date me, and you'll be happier. That everything seems to have a premise, but things do not have a premise. Humans, the human nervous system at the end, right at the top where it is now in the brain, it carries with it its own premise. It would be such as someone with jaundice, that everything they look at is yellow. So the things do not have to be yellow. The church does not, any course does not, any thought you have doesn't have to be yellow. Since you all have jaundice, whenever you look, it all has a yellow tinge. So it's not that things have a premise. It's not that I have to say this doesn't have a premise. Hell, nothing has a premise. But you think it does. That's why the premise does not have to be stated. That's why the course, that's why the church, that's why history, that's why all areas of human existence do not have to state the premise. All you got to do, what it amounts to in a sense, is you give half of it. And sometimes you don't have to have hardly anything. You just have a sign up on a nice looking building, or at one of the finer ballrooms in one of your finer hotels in one of your finer cities where some of you finer people live, and the sign says, here, 8:30 sharp. And you look inside and it's some fine furnishings, looks like a fine bar set up, looks like some fine people in there. The premise was 8:30, here. You'll take it. People wander in, they don't know. You see, you never thought about that. Or if it just says how to reprogram your subconscious, or if it says Jesus saves, what's the rest of it? The premise is that you need saving, or the church can help. That's all you got to say. The premise is, well, I need help. But see, they don't even have to say it. What I'm telling you is, the reason they don't have to say the full premise, apparently just half of it, that the premise is always there, and in the past I referred to it as tacit, but I might as well try and come clean. Nothing has a premise. It doesn't have it don't need a premise. As soon as you get up and look at it, you brought your premise with you. It's like somebody asked, did you bring your camera so that you can take a shot of this, whatever it is? And if you won't take a shot of it, and if you go, yeah, you got your premise. If your premise is, what is that? There's your premise. Somebody will tell you, and you go, oh, maybe you decide you're not any further interested. I don't guess I should push that tonight because we're having enough trouble already, right? Wrong. Left. All right. It not being a premise, I was going to say someone attempting to do whatever this is, if there's anybody attempting to do whatever this is, and if there is any such thing as this appears to be. And of course, whatever it appears to be, for the time being, would simply be your premise. But I'll go ahead and do it since we can't stay on that sort of spiral thinking. I'll go back and call it a real revolutionist. Somebody attempting to do this. And that's just a throwaway name for you people out there on tape. It just means nothing. A real revolutionist, though, would see their own uprising as opposed to what I've already set up, pointing out that in the visible world, revolutions are actually failures. They are resignations. And they are simply resignations at the end. Whenever they apparently occur, even after the fact, they occur only after the pleas, the threats, and attempted change has failed. But with a real revolutionist, as you might suspect, I know I did, it's got to be otherwise. Of course, that's a strong premise. That's assuming that the first thing is wise and this can be otherwise. But we won't stop there, will we? Because we have some of this tape left and it's already paid for, so we'll go ahead. A real revolutionist would see that their own particular uprising occurs once they realize this particular battlefield logistic, that is, the nature of sham revolutions, to realize that what seems to be changing my past, stuff I'm not necessarily proud of, but if something seems to jog my memory, or somebody asks me about something and says, well, hey, you don't seem to be as blank as you used to. You fill in the blank. You can go, well, no, I'm not. I'm not. It's not a revolution. That is, it is not some positive action that you've taken if you had that kind of proper unholy grasp on backward history, on your own memory. You would realize it was a form of resignation. So you got to understand the nature from this view that I'm referring to as the sham revolutions. The revolutions of resignation. The revolutions of surrender. As it's supposed to be. There's nothing wrong. And I or no one else is certainly going to change the verbal bureaucracy of ordinary life so that people are going to start calling victory failure and vice versa. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But to do this sort of thing, you have got to simply see that what has seemed to be at old levels, at earthbound levels, to be revolutions of some nature was a form of surrender. You've got to see that for your uprising to actually have commenced. And then, of course, cease to waste any of your energy on it, especially to waste your energy over ever thinking about it again. And then you have got to realize that the kind of revolutions that I'm referring to, that you've got to see for yourself, and then you don't have to call it a revolution, you can call it anything you want to. But you've got to see that those kinds of real revolutions always proceed sans premises. Because there can't be a revolution on the basis of some premise, which should, at least verbally, give you some cause to come up short right there. Why else would somebody rebel? That is, why would somebody try to change if there was no premise? But let's stick with a verbal picture of revolution. If we were back talking about, what does they call it? The world out there, yeah. The world out there. I need to write that. The world out there. Something that's separate from you. Yeah, that's what they call it. The world out there. In the world out there, what could be more ridiculous than for me to say that there could ever be a revolution with no premise? What if you were out in the streets? I don't care where you lived, in Kev, Sophia, Birmingham, somewhere really repressive. If you're out in the street and holler, off with their heads, down with the ruling class, whoever it was. Of course, I went too far already. If you just were out in the street and hollered, oh, I'm here to start a revolution, or you had some sort of sign that says, hothead, radical, and you're out in the street, and in some way you could send out radical vibes and hot-headed vibes, and if you stood around there a few minutes and you attracted, let us say, not flies, but some other wired-up people to be hotheads and radicals. And so within a reasonable length of time, you look around and they're all kind of huddled up behind you, waiting for you to lead. And they say, we're ready, we're ready, we're ready. What's the premise? You got no premise. Remember, I hate to refer to other philosophers and let them take any credit, but I still think it was Brando in that movie, The Wild One, that in the 50s, right? Post-WW2 surge of attempted rebellion in our fair country, that there he was hanging around looking snotty and rebellious, and some town person says, well, what is it you're rebelling against? And he says, what do you got? See, that would not actually work, though. You have now attracted these other forces that says, all right, we're ready, we're ready. What are we rebelling against? Now again, pretend this is, what is it? Oh yeah, out there. This out there. And you say, well, we don't care, we'll just rebel. You're not rebels. You're just crooks, hoodlums. You know, it's not a revolution. Anyway, you must see what I'm saying. There could be no revolution. If some kind of little anomalistic burst of energy happened somewhere in history that this did occur, history would not even record it. Well, what would you call it? There was some revolution somewhere in Russia, Bulgaria, or Alabama. How could they call it that there was the great revolution of 1879? That you know, the one that everybody needs to know about, and the one that, you know, devastated such and such areas of the city and killed so many people. The revolution of no known purpose. I guess that's what they'd have to call it. The revolution that no one knew why it happened. What I'm saying is that kind of transient anomaly did happen in life's bloodstream, which it can. You can get a little goiter, or a little bump on the head, a little pimple, but history would not record it because you couldn't actually have a revolution unless there was some premise. You got to be trying to change something. I am telling you that this kind of revolution, when it is not occurring in you, your uprising has not started until you realize, boy, we're back in premise territory when somebody begins to hold up their hand and start to count like, all right, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Of course, remember, as Kyroots pointed out, in some parts of the universe, after the number 3, it's all downhill. But I didn't want to go into that. And I'm sure you don't. But your own uprising has not started until you've got your own, not mine and not some words I said, but your own awareness that what seems to be revolutions in life and in your life and everybody else's is simply a form of resignation. That's it. There's nothing to cry about. There's nothing to whine about. It's like discovering, after all these years, maybe somebody told you, maybe you suspect it and you just didn't want to know. It's like discovering that you've got a small kind of a ersatz ear that started going out behind your, and finally you get in the right kind of mirror. You go and decide maybe to have a bespoke suit made, and they've got the real mirrors, and you glance up and finally you see, well, shit, I do have a little fake nose growing out of. What are you going to do? To realize the nature, I'm calling them sham revolutions, the ones that I started out speaking of, the revolutions that are forms of resignations. You've got to recognize that. That's number 2. Number 1, that was a joke. The other one is you have got to, if you want to, recognize that if there is another form of revolution, if there is a way that actually, in some manner, begins to parallel or begins to approach what you dreamed of as being real change, being able to scratch this ungodly place that you can't even find where it itches, to be able to find that you can smile in your brain in such a way that makes cocaine, no offense to you fine drug growers in case this makes it into Columbia, no offense. They can make your brain smile in such a way that it's almost more fun than we need to even talk about, because then it sounds like I'm holding out some promise, and I would not do that. But that kind of fun of life, that kind of fun, it's beyond all the great holy books, and even Isaiah didn't know anything about it. That kind of fun is on the basis that there is a kind of revolution, but it's what I was calling this time again, the real revolution. But that kind of real revolution, the tricky part, to say the very least, is it's got no premise. You're not trying to be found not guilty. You're not staying there hanging around the jukebox in your black leather jacket and some part of your nervous system says, well, I know you've been kind of rebellious, kind of a smart ass all your life. That's you saying to you. What is it you really want? That is, what are you rebelling against? The real revolution is, it's beyond all that. There is no premise. You're not rebelling against you. You're not rebelling against the good town folk in you. You're not rebelling against your kinfolks. You're not rebelling against your kinfolks as genetic enemies. You're not rebelling against history. It's almost the Marlon Brando line turned inside out, and as you always know, then a little the other way, around the bend. It's not just inside out, won't get it. But what you're rebelling against, it's beyond nothing. See, if it's just inside out, the answer to the question of what are you rebelling against that the town folk ask you down in the good old middle class bourgeoisie part of your brain, what are you rebelling against? Instead of what have you got, that is everything. If you just turned inside out, the answer would be, well, nothing. Well, see, that's not it. What are you rebelling against deserves no answer. It deserves the answer that Jesus gave in that kind of mythological story. Come on, speak up. Come on, boy, say something. That's inside out. That's not yes or no. Because we said yes, then inside out's no, and vice versa. It's got to be inside out, and then to start to go right around the corner. That is a revolution with no premise. That's the only kind of revolution there is. That's the only kind of change there is. Any other change is shifting around, trying to play the three-card Monte and the three-shell game. You're trying to play that with the neural evidence already in your nervous system and come up with a new verdict. That, all right, I'm not guilty. All right, I'm not as guilty as I was. All right, sure, I failed, a few times before, but I'll try it again. Sure, I failed a few times before. I won't try it again. I'll just announce that I've won the war. That's it, I won. Resignation. But it's all based on a premise. That is part of, again, I would point out, at least from one view, some of the beautiful ledger domain in the nervous system of man that life continues to enact, portray through us. That one thing can seem to be exactly what it is, and then you can, or somebody can, even make it appear to be, wait a minute, that's not exactly what it appears to be. Religion, always a good kicking dog, purports to help people, and look at the many peoples it's killed. In other words, things can apparently be one way. The part of life is wired up to say religion, or a specific religion. My religion, couldn't do without it, absolute boon to mankind. But then another part of life's body, through man, is wired in such a way as to point out that I can turn that inside out. In fact, how ironic it is that this very institution, purporting to help man, destroys humans, wrecks their minds, censors art. But see, all of you are supposed to always remember this already. Everything in the visible world, in the three-dimensional world, it's inescapable. Very few things I state dogmatically. Huh. That everything eventually, if you look at long enough, just use you personally, if you look at long enough, everything will finally become ironic. There's no way out. We got to turn the tape over. No, we don't. It just appears that way in the 3D world. We'll just press on. All right, I'll resign myself to the fact that you got to turn it over. Are we back on? All right. Let's talk some about how you might find a connection between this and what I was describing as the wet and the dry brain. It is the dry brain that has got to resign itself verbally. The wet brain cannot resign itself verbally. The wet brain, if it reached a point, which is not where I was going with your attention tonight, or trying to, does not resign itself in any way that would be beyond primary affairs. It would almost have to be a resignation on the basis of life and death. Such things as attempting to, if you were starving, to take food and that something non-verbally told you that if I try to take the only available food I see is over there next to that guy, and non-verbally I get the message, although I'm starving, if I try to take that food from that guy, I'm going to die faster than I will from starvation if I don't take his food. It's that kind of resignation would be closest to a resignation. So what you have with when it appears that threats, pleas, and these attempts at change have failed, what you're talking about are dry brain failures. Now can you see this? In revolutionary terms, the dry brain is a firm supporter of peace, tranquility. It is very specifically an extremely ardent supporter of the institutionalization of life. It is to change adventure and uncertainty for civility. It is to institutionalize as much of the mute, dark, and to it dangerous aspects of the wet brain as possible. Even more specifically, the dry brain, when I say institutionalize, wants to institutionalize life. It sets up, or at times it thinks it discovers. Backward history tells you that some of what I'm about to describe is discovered or revealed from higher forces, from gods, goddesses. It specifically wants to deal with, to set up, discover, have revealed to, and then deal with customs and rituals. That is specifically what I'm trying to point your attention to tonight when I say that the dry brain is a firm, even vociferous supporter of just the almost unconditional institutionalization of life. When I say customs and rituals, it is attempting to set up, it wants to set up, and that covers all of it if I don't do it for you, but you can think about yourself, between customs and rituals. That covers everything from what would seem to be the secular to the semi-secular, the clerical, the demi-clerical, that the dry brain is wired up in such a way that it wants to take the uncertain, the untrustworthy habits, the dark habits, down there in that cesspool to it, well, at least a dangerous pool, this genetic swamp down there, to take what obviously, it can't admit it, it doesn't want to talk about it, is witnessed by the continuing question of, are we run by our genes or our environment? When dry brain looking down in there knows goddamn well what the answer is. But life has decided, no, as I pointed out to you, every now and then life keeps sending out these feelers, and it'll make some human stand up and say, wait a minute, I can prove that the environment has nothing to do with the way we live. And maybe a bunch of people will run up behind this guy and go, hey, I like that. And then it's as though this huge shudder runs through Birmingham and Kev and the people staying there, and they all sort of wander off like, well, I wasn't here. I didn't show up. I didn't tell that guy I believed in that crap. He just kind of goes away and life again realizes, no, time's not right yet. Men cannot find themselves not guilty yet. It would interfere with what's going on. But through ritual, through custom, through civility, in a sense what you have is the dry brain attempting to break up this chaotic universal wetness, break it up and to form it into some sort of more predictable, local, personal dryness. to have civility instead of adventure, instead of uncertainty, instead of danger. You do not realize, obviously I'm about to answer my own question to you, how much ritual and custom, the institutionalizing of life, that is your behavior. All right, if you don't get played dirty then, your thinking is institutionalized. Now, that's the way it's supposed to be, but for someone attempting to do whatever this is, that is not a godsend. Now, it's a godsend that everybody else, as much as life even does it now, that everybody else, some portions of everybody else, seem to live by certain mores, customs, rituals, standards, laws, that they're fairly civil. That all of us sitting here now have yet to have our throats cut. But someone attempting to do this has got to realize that in a more complex fashion, that this is all a kind of resignation. It is a kind of excuse. It is just fancy names for fucking habit. That's the technical, in case don't interview of very sensitive sensibilities to be desensitized, but that's sometimes you just have to use that kind of forceful language when you're operating from a kind of forceful discipline, and so on. To perceive, to take the perceptions that life sends through you, that human life needs to be institutionalized, that it must be, that we must have laws, we must have rituals, there must be customs. And when I said that I wanted you to try and consider a range all the way from the apparent otherworldly religious to the very mundane, the customs and the laws would seem to be the mundane, that they're things you have to do. You can only drive 55 on some of your state's highways. You don't feel any particular religious compunction one way or the other about that. It's like, well, if I don't, I've already been caught twice this year, and my insurance is going out, they're going to take my license, etc. You just do it. It's just a custom or a law. Or it's a custom you do not spit in the floor of public places. You might want to spit real bad, and you don't. But then it goes from customs into rituals. That there are things, that in other words, you don't say things like, you don't make fun of religions, or you don't spit in the floor of a public place, especially a church. Or if you were wired up in a certain way, that there are certain rituals you do. That's got nothing to do with animals. But there are certain rituals that you persistently follow, and if you don't, you find yourself not guilty. A real revolutionist, that is someone whose nervous system in some way is straining with some degree of success periodically of the weight of Earth's gravity on your intelligence, to realize that all of that, as it were, is a resignation. That it's all an excuse. Not to everybody else. I say that, everybody here knows I was going to say that, for a few people that might be seeing these tapes and you. Not for everybody else. But attempting to do this, you can call it ritual, you can call it custom, you can call it mores, standards of civil behavior, but it's all resignation. It is all a swapping of any possible plurality of behavior and of thought for the currently inevitable. It is the dry brain looking down into the wet brain, and it realizes to it that this is some sort of apparently universal chaos. But all is not lost, because as long as you can talk, you can apparently begin to make some inroads in cutting this thing up verbally. And if you can cut it up, if you can become selective, then apparently you can have some effect on it. Notwithstanding the fact, of course, that you can't have any effect on it. But that is part of the treasure of the dry brain, of local reality. that it can talk about action. It can think about action, it can talk about action, and as long as it can change its talk, apparently something has actually happened. Let's just don't look into it too far. And don't have smart eggs like some of you people going around and saying, wait a minute, let's look at that a little deeper. Nobody wants to look at it any deeper, they're not supposed to. You get your nose caught down there and that thing could suck you back in there. There you were being civilized, trying to be intelligent, and fooling around with stuff like this, and you kept looking over, and nobody ever warned you not to get too close. I never told you not to get too close. And suddenly it's like, it sucked a piece of your clothes and you're back in it. See, dry brain realizes that. We have got to be civil. We have got to have certain standards. There's certain things that are right and wrong. There are things you've got to believe in. I mean, they just are. Right. They are. That is what passes for ordinary change. That's what passes for ordinary revolutions in the visible world. That is resignation, stagnation, that we will be civil as opposed to being adventurous, as opposed to at least living in a state of some kind of uncertainty. I'd rather be in some sort of state of absolute tyranny. If I had to, if given the choice, I'd rather be there and at least know where I stand. At least there be, as they like to say in good tyrannical governments, well, at least you can go out and walk the streets in peace every night, that your neighbors won't mug you. Now, if you're going to get mugged, it's going to be the state's going to do it. But at least your neighbors won't. They're afraid to. So they can always say that. And ordinary intelligence, local intelligence, can say, well, I would prefer to live under the iron rule of some tyrannical government than I would to just be wandering the kind of streets, wandering around and wondering which way is up and what's going on next, and having no sense of morality, no religion, no feel for my ancestors, my history, no roots, no memory. I hate to start talking like that. I get all carried away, and I keep see, because not I, but I keep thinking that some of you are suddenly going to begin to listen and think, wait a minute, I'm beginning to find out what this is about. But see, wouldn't that be neat? That I'm playing out the kind of thing the ordinary, intelligent, reasonable people should be condemning? Like, what do you mean? I couldn't live like that. You mean have no feel for my ancestors? No concern for my fellow man? No belief in history? No fears? No hopes? No dreams? My God! What kind of life? But see, as I said, I sort of look around, I keep thinking some of you, while I'm making this great condemnation, speaking for certain aspects of life, that some of you begin to listen, you don't hear a condemnation, you begin to perk up. I'm just trying to show you the weirdness of all this. You begin to perk up and think, God, is that possible? Not on this planet. Well, let me be more specific. Not on your planet. There is a nexus in all of this with something else. There is this continuing apparent conflict, a kind of historic struggle war between supporters of two other camps I can define for you. It seems to be the supporters that life is wired up of myth and of science. It's been called all sorts of things, religion and science, but let's call it myth and science for a minute. Science being facts, not some kind of otherworldly, strange beliefs in rituals, gods, and religions, but facts. I could also refer to it, it's like a hard and soft reality. The soft, of course, being the supporters that life has many. Always has, still does. Even if they don't call them myths, but supporters of what would amount to a soft reality. And then, of course, now exemplified primarily in our day and time by science, by the world of academia and the intellect, would be the hard reality, the facts. Not myths, but note, historically, right up until today, under many names, and not all of them of a pejorative nature. Many of them are respected. But the myths, the supporters of the soft reality, are made by life, financed by life, to say such things as, we have got to have a soft reality. That is, we've got to have the world of myths. Even if they aren't using these terms, they may be talking about religions. They may be talking about social customs. They may be talking about morality. They say, now listen, because it's valid. They would say that we need myths. We need a kind of soft reality. We need the ability for soft intellect, soft thinking. Because this gives man the freedom to dream. Then, as you might expect, the supporters, equally financed by life, which, in case you think that the big corporations are the ones that discovered giving the Democratic candidate X thousands of dollars and give the Republican a like amount. In case you think that's something new, you've already forgotten about Life's puppet show. Life finances everybody. Every party gets equal financing until they realize, as always, which Life already knows, it just sometimes seems to take it a split second to realize that there are only two parties. It may start out that the apparent candidates are the Democrats, Republicans, and the Independents, then some socialists, and then some Leninist socialists, and then some Marxist socialists. But they're not. There are only two parties in every race. Those in power and those that want to get in power. And Life finances them all. So you have Life financing, you remember where we were, the supporters of science and facts as a hard reality. So as opposed to the supporters of the soft reality, which say we have got to have, there is a necessary place, not just allowable, but a necessary place that we have got to have soft thinking. There's got to be a soft reality. There's got to be the world of myth. I repeat again, they do not necessarily call it myth. There's got to be this kind of world because it is that world that gives man the freedom to dream of other possibilities. Just the freedom to dream. This other group, the supporters of the hard reality, the facts, they are financed to say this, to put forth this program. That what we need is not that. We need this hard thinking because what man needs is firm, dependable, factual data on which to act on the basis of how things are. Do you hear it? Now, I told you they're both valid. But also, you should be able to hear in your own nervous system. If you were just stuck with good old local reality, I could have emphasized more one or the other, or left a second example further away from you in time, and you would have wanted to latch on to one of them, even if you didn't like the terms myth and science. But if I said, all right, what we need, forget all that. We'll take a side trip right quick, because one or two of you almost heard that. If I said, look, the most important thing about intelligence, forget coming here listening to me talk or reading books, just yourself. You got to realize this, what you and everyone else needs, any right-thinking human, you need the kind of mind that is not just tied to just old damn common facts. I mean, they're all right, I guess. But you need the ability to dream. History, progress has been made by people who could dream. That's the most important thing. Not insanity, not being some crackpot, but the ability to dream, not just tied to the anchors of cold, calculating, heartless facts. And many of you, more or less half of you, should go, yeah. But then if I bypass that or change the subject matter and I start it another way and say, wait a minute. The only thing that has saved humanity, the only thing that has made humanity grow, the only thing that has made your life as agreeable as it is, the only thing that's given you any possibility of improving your life is not dreams. And you don't have to be a scientist when I use the word science, but what we need is some kind of firm data. That's what we're trying to collect in life. Not dreams, because if we're going to get anywhere, or looking back over us having progressed, it's on the basis of having factual data so that we could deal with things as they are, not dreams. And then half of you would go, yeah. Of course, if you're good, half of you who originally, the first half that went yeah to miss, now half of you of that half of your nervous system will go, yeah. So you see. Does anyone remember, this has a much more universal implication than we're obviously going to have time for tonight. But one other aspect, does everybody remember the play The Wild Duck of Ibsen? And there's variations of this, but that was in your relative lifetime, even in translation, one of the more direct of this group of people that he drew up. There was, whatever it was, 6 or 7 characters in this house, and they rented out some rooms, and they were fairly archetypical of Western man in the 20th century. And one of the people, or several of the characters, they kept this wild duck, and they kept having some sort of dreams about what they were going to do, about leave that area, and it got tied up the people downstairs, the scientists, and I think there was a doctor, but it was the archetypical of those that they kept bad-mouthing. They kept trying to encourage the people with the wild duck of, come to your senses. You've let this wild duck in your dreams become a kind of inhibiting idée fixe with you, and you've got to face facts. That kind of wild duck dynamic strewn throughout the intellectual history of man, in the books, in your nervous system, says this, that this wild duck kind of dynamic says that not only is soft thinking, soft reality questionable, but too much of it is downright debilitating for man's mental health. That there is, I point this out, it's a conflict, it's a struggle. One side's not winning, one side's not supposed to win. You've got, as always, this kind of going through the nervous system of life itself. But you have this continual, oftentimes apparently more verbal and obvious than at other times, of this condemnation of the wild duck syndrome. Have you people got to quit dreaming, some group of people, at some particular time and place, that life has somebody speak. At times then it may even become apparently institutionalized for that time and place, for that group, of saying, you people have got to straighten up. You got to quit going out there and worshiping some kind of golden calf. You got to come in here and worship the real God. You got to face the facts. You got to quit. See if this sounds any more up to date to you. You've got to quit sitting around there, banging on that piano, trying to draw those pictures. My God, you're 17 years old. You better start singing off for college catalogs. You got to decide what to do with your life. You can't hang around nightclubs all your life trying to play the piano. Face facts. You got to make a living. As opposed to what? But it is a strong condemnation. Any of you who want to notice, it has been more prevalent in the Western, as it's called, cutting up into 3-dimensional quadrants on our planet, what seems to be the Western world of pushing the condemnation of the myths, the myth world, soft thinking, soft reality. It is now becoming more and more of a 1-quadrant world. But in your nervous system, you can find variations of this, of the struggle between a soft reality, an outlook of your parts of your nervous system that sees a soft reality, that things are possible. I can dream, I can look at this, and I can dream of something else. I can feel that maybe something's possible, and not be tied to what seems to be the lockstep and limitations of facts. And then it's as though your mother in your own nervous system comes and slaps you around. Snap out of that. You can't daydream all your life. Come to your senses. It happens historically. It happens individually, which to some of you should be a moot point by now, because it could not happen institutionally, or it does not happen, what do they call it? Oh, out there, unless it already happened somewhere else. I'll leave it to you to figure out where else it happened. But you have a strong part of your nervous system, and it's be very strong in people in this part of the world, still perhaps at this time and place a little more than other areas of this planet right now, that it's wired in the general belief that there can be far too much of dealing with the wild duck dreams, soft reality, myths, anything other than hard reality, facts, the obvious, because it is only that kind of data that intelligent, reasonable people can use to move forward. That's so well put by that contemporary philosophical tag team of Leonard and Lowe, with a little bit of luck, with a little bit of luck. Also in your nervous system, though, if you notice, and out there, if you can notice in a certain way, the part of life's body, the part in your body that is wired up to condemn the hard reality supporters, that is, the myth makers, that's still extant, and all of you will assume it's certainly still extant upon this planet, that is, it's still extant in life's body and necessary. Those who might nowadays be apparently a little more intelligent and say, well, we're not against science, we're not against facts, but my God, you cannot believe that it is simply facts that has produced human progress, or that has given us what we've got. It's not facts. Even when you try to look at the aspects historically that a Newton began to write down for the first time, to identify, to specify and label the laws of gravity, thermodynamics. He didn't just sit down and think, well, I think I'll make up a law. It was a kind of dealing in soft reality, a kind of dreaming of the Leonardos and the Hookes and the Sales. Well, I hadn't mentioned Super Sales this month. I was trying to work him in somewhere. They would say that even though they may apparently end up, or unquestionably end up, dealing with facts and even establish their whole areas and expertise or a whole new science, they first were dreamers. These kind of supporters, wired up in life to support the soft realities, the myths, that in a sense condemn, when it comes down to the one-on-one, condemn the hard reality supporters. Even when they do that, their condemnation is flawed because they cannot engage, either one of them, I'm using this example to get you started, they cannot engage in universal condemnation. So they cannot, the myth makers cannot properly say that there is something lacking, and the hard reality supporters, that they're not taking it all in consideration. Their condemnation does not take it all in consideration. I was afraid of that. And we were going along so well. All right, let's try it this way. We've got Group A and we've got Group B. That's not really their names, but I don't want to go into it. And Group A seems to hold a certain kind of thought structure, and it seems to even be related to their behavior. Group B seems to engage in an alternative behavior, and it seems to be in some way tied to diverse thoughts, sometimes known as beliefs and opinions and all that other. Group A, let's say, exhibits some, oftentimes referred to as enlightened intelligence, as exemplified by the fact that Group A does not completely condemn Group B. They say there are certain aspects of Group B that has some validity. Not enough to free them from my criticism, and not enough to make them worthy neighbors or to join in of our group, but there is some validity. In other words, it is only a partial condemnation. It would be the Christian religion saying, well, now the Muslims are worshiping, I mean, we've got to admit that they got off on the wrong foot. They're worshiping the wrong God to start with. But that doesn't mean that they're not without some merit. I mean, some of the pillars of their faith is to that everybody is obligated for charitable donations to help the poor among them, which is right in line with Christianity. So it is only, and so you would pass for being somewhat, if this is not a real oxymoron, some sort of enlightened or semi-enlightened or tolerant religious person. That, well, yeah, the Muslims, you know, they're going to all die and go to hell, if you're a real fundamentalist Christian, I guess, because, you know, they're worshiping the wrong God. You know, Albert, or what's his name, Allah or something, you know, they got the wrong God, so they're on the wrong foot. But I guess some of them are probably good to their family, and they say they should contribute money. So it would sound as though it's simply a partial condemnation. But it's all partial condemnation. I did so hope that was going to help. If you're condemning, if you are negatively wired, if you're wired up to react negatively to any local phenomenon, any dry brain based phenomenon, your criticism of it, no matter how well-founded it may seem, no matter how much in the majority of your time and place you may seem to fit, there is no possible view. I'm calling it condemnation and criticism, which is usually the only time that people take any note of it. There is no view that you can take that is going to be universal if you're dealing with a local situation. There is no way to make a universal assessment of any local phenomenon. Because no matter what comment, no matter what thought allows you to have, if you only got a half-inch pipe, you're not going to take in any more water than that in your bucket. The view you have, the info, the apparent receiving and accepting of information taking place that I'm referring to you now is local reality. You cannot have anything other than a local view. You cannot look at a piece of pie. Now, I know ordinary logic tells you otherwise, but you cannot look at a piece of pie and tell and assess the whole pie. Ordinary intelligence, of course, will tell you that's wrong, because if the slice is like that, all you got to have is like 9th grade geometry, and you know exactly the size of the pie. In the 3D world, yeah, you can't deny that. But the size of the pie, the size of the slice, you just look right at it. Even if you can't remember how to describe the actual theorems involved, you could look at it and you could draw it out and say, well, there's going to be the size of the pie. You cannot make a universal assessment of any local phenomenon. No matter what you say pro or con, it is lacking. Well, I gave you 3 shots. And remember, in some parts of some universes, right after the number 3, of course, that's assuming in those universes there is a... Because if you weren't captive to that, it might be after number 3 it went... 10 minutes. Also related. To local and universal reality and other such blatantly obvious areas. Since I bring up stories, to jump from Scandinavia to Georgia, as a matter of fact, everybody remembers, I've used it for other reasons, the good old story of the tar baby. That little fable of the fox that set up made a little figure out of tar and got behind it, and then as the rabbit went by, which is, according to the story, the fox had primary interest in, mainly he would invite him to dinner. As he got behind the tar baby and begins to talk about the rabbit's family and a derogatory manner. He begins to run the dozens on the rabbits, what he does, and the rabbit begins to talk back to the tar baby, and the fox finally gets him so mad and dares him to hit him. And you're supposed to remember that by attacking this apparent foe, this insulting figure, the rabbit gets stuck. And the more he fights and kicks the tar baby, the more he's held to it. A real revolutionist would look upon all of creation, not just locally, but all of creation, he would look on as being a kind of tar baby. A kind of positive tar baby. All right, since you went that far, then let me, of course, rename it. It's really more like a love baby. In that, if I may use the distaff example, in that, let's call her a she here for a second, just with a small s. It's kind of, all of creation becomes a love baby that no matter where you grab it, it still offers pleasure and instruction. There is no wrong place to try and grab hold. It would be like, if we were looking at it again from the male view, it would be like creation being a woman with just almost an infinite number of those juicy parts, you know, the good, wherever you looked, assuming you were a thigh man, wherever you looked, it was just thighs, thighs, thighs. That there was no place there was not a thigh. And a darn good one. A snappy thigh. And of course with women, I don't want to go into it, you come up with your own versions of that. But it would be that there was no longer any need. You would not be tied for looking for local pleasure, because there is none. And there would be no place that would be incorrect in which to try and cop a feel. That there would be nothing institutionalized to the point that, well, wait a minute, I can't consider this, or it's either forbidden, or else it's useless, or else I wouldn't enjoy it. It just makes no sense. I'm not interested in it, which is about the final put down, sexually, and here as well. No, you know, thanks, but no thanks. That doesn't interest me. That is not a revolution, and that would not be a revolutionist. You do see, surely, when I start out with this little closing picture with a tar baby, but instead of hitting and fighting at life, that's why I'm putting it as a positive tar baby, to a real revolutionist, all of creation is a kind of love baby. Not particularly selective, in a selective way. It's not necessarily that you're a thigh man anymore. It's that all of it, no matter where you grab it, offers some pleasure, and it always offers some instruction, which the tar baby did not. So wherever you grab it, not only will the thing give you some fun, but it always has something to tell you. It offers some instruction. And there's no wrong place to grab it. There is no improper way. There is no morality when you get into that kind of universal intellectual eroticism. You can grab it anywhere if you know how. And so I've heard, I'll just tell you why, that the thing will almost moan every time you do it. And not only kind of make you smile in your own brains, but it always has something. After you have the fun, it's almost, instead of when it's over, instead of, as it happens in the 3D world, instead of it offering you a cigarette or scramble you some eggs before you go, after it gives you the pleasure, then it's like it gives you an intellectual fortune cookie, and it tells you something. Local phenomenon cannot do that. Local reality is incapable of giving you such a role in the cerebral hay. You cannot get laid locally and have this kind of experience, because locally you're never satisfied. Locally it's, well, yeah, you do it, but hell, you get horny again. Locally it is, well, I've connected a bunch more of the dots and I'm getting somewhere, except if I'm not mistaken, there's more dots here than there was yesterday. Or some of the ones I connected yesterday, that's some of the ones that are not disconnected. But that's some of the same ones I connected yesterday. What's going on here? They just held up 3 fingers. And that means, I assume, that we only got 3 minutes left, or someone has learned, I don't know how, but a very secret Bulgarian obscene gesture. That, in case there are any children out there, I'm not going to show you exactly how it goes. Of course, there are those that say every gesture they make in Bulgaria is obscene. But don't write me if you're from Bulgaria. But assuming that we have now reached a satisfactory conclusion, that you see that we did discuss revolutions, wet rains, dry rains, institutionalization of life itself, rituals, customs. But in case you missed any of the indexed subjects that I promised to cover, remember this: behind it all, I was still talking about one thing, whether you heard it or not, and that's energy. The rest of it was just talk. Just talk. The real part of it was what's going on, is the energy. And without further ado, I do.